I'm with you, sweetie, Allison said. Besides, I've grown to love this too much to walk away from it. They assumed she was referring to Jake's manhood, as we couldn't see what she was referring to. All right then, Jake said. Come on, let's go upstairs and get the real party started. Goody, Allison said as they headed up the stairs. This time, I want you guys to make me airtight. There was no movement in the video, but they could hear the sounds of sex coming from the bedroom. Mark ended the video and put his head in his hands. RK put a reassuring hand on his shoulder. I know this is going to be rough on you, but we'll get you through this. Mark nodded his head. Thanks, R. What are you going to do? I'm divorcing her, there's no question about that, Mark said. I understand, AR said. Why don't you get away from here for a few days? Let me and the boys handle this. What do you plan on doing? It's probably best if you don't know, AR said. I can tell you this, we just witnessed a criminal conspiracy. If I have my way, someone will go to jail. But we need to get you out of here for a bit. But I can help you, Mark said. AR shook his head. No, you're in danger right now, and the last thing we need is for you to go off on any of them. Remember old Gunny Johnson? Well, he's retired and in Vegas now. He owes me a favor or three. He said he'd set me up with a place to rack out for a few days if I ever wanted to visit Vegas. I'll call him and see what he can do for you. Mark nodded his head. Okay, let me get the place here wired for audio and video, then I'll head out. You need to maintain, understand? Mark nodded his head. Thanks, RK, you're a good friend. I appreciate it. RK smiled. Semper Fi, bro. Do or die, RK said. Hurrah, Mark said. He went on the back porch with a beer as RK wired the front room and the bedrooms for audio and video. RK also tapped the house phone. He set it up so that all the audio and video would be stored on a cloud server that could be accessed from anywhere on the internet. When he finished, he gave Mark the server address and credentials to access the files. He also showed Mark the switch that would let him turn the surveillance system on and off. I'll call Gunny tomorrow and let you know what he says. One way or another, we're getting you out of here. Don't do anything stupid, you hear me? I hear you, AR. Okay, Mark said. I hope so, Mark, he said. Hang tough, my friend. I'll be in touch. I will, RK, Mark said. Thanks again for everything. After RK left, Mark turned on his computer and pulled up his bank accounts. He still had one open from before he got married that was in his name only. Since he married Allison, he deposited 10% of his earnings into that as a rainy day fund. He had hoped to use the money for a cruise as a surprise gift to Allison, but those days were done. He transferred half of everything out of their joint account into his old account, then paid off and cancelled their joint credit cards. He still had a card in his name only from his original account. Shutting that down, he packed enough clothes to last him a few days and threw the suitcases into his car. Coming inside the house, his gaze fell on the wedding portrait that hung on the wall over the fireplace. Allison looked so beautiful in her wedding dress that day. He was the happiest man on earth and thought he had hit the jackpot. But no longer filled with rage at her betrayal, he grabbed a large hunting knife and shredded the portrait. Once finished, he looked around and pulled down every picture that included Allison. All of them got tossed into the fireplace. He ran upstairs and pulled her wedding dress from the closet, then tossed that into the fireplace as well. He considered burning it all right then, but decided to wait a bit. At that moment, he was filled with blind, seething hatred for her and wanted her to personally witness their marriage going up in flame. Then he had another idea. Grabbing a bottle of beer, he went back to the couch and picked up his phone. He emailed the video to himself and verified it on his laptop. He wrote a very carefully worded letter to each member of the board of directors and David, the interim CEO, explaining in detail what had transpired. He remembered something Alan had told him: the board wouldn't respond too well to threats, but they would respond to a careful and thoughtful analysis of any situation. He didn't know David very well, having only spoken to him a few times, but hoped. He was as reasonable as the members of the board. Without threatening anyone, he reminded the board that Jake, as an executive, was required to operate under the morals clause of his employment agreement, and his actions, along with those of his wife, were exactly the kind of things the morals clause was written to address. He also reminded them that their actions were not only criminal in nature, but were the types of things that could spark lawsuits and scandal, the type of scandal that could easily destroy a company like Marcus Financial. He reminded them of his time with the company, telling them of his great respect for Alan. He expressed hope they would do the right thing. He read and reread his letter, editing a few words here and there when he was satisfied. He wrote an email, attaching the letter and the video, and sent it to David as well as each member of the board, telling them he would be on vacation for the week but could be reached by email or phone. He suspected he probably wouldn't hear anything until Tuesday, and by then, he planned to be out of the area. He then sat back, lit up a cigarette, and put it in the candy dish, watching as the heat from the lit cigarette burned into Alison's face. At that moment, that's exactly what he wanted to do to her. He picked up her phone and unlocked it. He knew the code since he set it up for her when he first got it. He went through her text messages and got even more furious. It seemed the two of them had been screwing for at least the last 6 months, but it was only in the last 3 that Alison began openly disrespecting him to Jake. Of course, he thought just the fact that she was screwing him was disrespectful enough. He found a treasure trove of pictures. Pictures of Jake naked. There were other pictures of Jake and Alison playing kiss-a-face and dancing in a nightclub, perhaps in New York, and pictures of Alison's face surrounded by other naked men. Other pictures showed her getting plowed by 2 men at the same time. One of them showed her getting screwed from the rear by a large man while Jake did her face. He wondered who took the pictures and if they were taken with this phone or another device she had. She had also stored videos on the phone, videos of her having sex with Jake and others, including the 3 men at the party. No wonder she acted as if she already knew them, he thought. By then, he had downed 6 beers and smoked half a pack of cigarettes, grinding them out on her face in the bottom of the dish. He looked outside and saw that the sun had already started to rise. Soon, he thought, she would be up and would know that he had left. He figured she would be up in about an hour or 2, so he grabbed his shotgun, made sure it was loaded, and locked both locks on his door. Then he laid back down on the couch with the shotgun next to him and tried to get some sleep. Alison woke up and looked at the clock on the nightstand next to Jake's bed. She saw it was 8:30, so she rolled out of bed and went to the bathroom to clean up. Jake and the others began to stir and were up by the time she got out of the bathroom. Jake threw on a robe and looked at Alison. "You want to go downstairs and get some breakfast started?" he asked. "Mark will probably want some coffee, assuming he's waking up." "Yeah, sure," she said. She tossed on a robe, padded downstairs in her bare feet, and went into the kitchen. She started a pot of coffee and walked into the living room to wake up her husband. Then she realized with a start that he wasn't there. The Afghan she put over him was thrown back, and his shoes were gone. She ran around the first floor, thinking that perhaps he was in the bathroom, but he wasn't there. Looking out the front window, she realized their car was gone. She turned around and saw his ring sitting on her purse, which was laying on its side on the coffee table. "Oh," she gasped. She ran upstairs, yelling. Jake stopped her as she ran into the master bedroom. "What's wrong?" he asked. "He's gone," she said. "What do you mean, gone?" "He's gone, goddamn," she yelled. "He must have woken up in the middle of the night and left. He took the car and left his wedding ring. You better call him and see if you can track him down. Tell him he needs to come pick you up." "Okay," she said, running back downstairs. She put Mark's ring in her purse and looked for her phone, but it wasn't there. She was certain she had brought it with her last night. She never went anywhere without it. By then, Jake was downstairs. "My phone is gone." "That's okay, use the house phone." You don't understand, I never go anywhere without it. It's full of texts, along with the pictures and videos you sent to me. If he has it, he's probably seen them. Don't worry about it. What we need to do is get him over here. The boys and I will take things over from there. Now, call him. Allison nodded her head and picked up the phone in Jake's living room. She nervously dialed Mark's cell phone, hoping he would answer. Hello? Mark said when he answered. He sounded as if he had just woken up. Mark, sweetie, it's me, she said. The hell you want, he growled. Allison recoiled. He had never spoken to her like that before. She realized he must be super pissed. I had no idea. Mark, honey, you weren't here when I got up, and I was worried about you. Are you all right? What the hell do you care? Mark, please, you weren't here when I got up, and I was worried about you. Are you all right? What the hell do you care? He growled. Allison, tell me another one, Mark said. We need to talk. Damn right we do. Then I need you to come to Jake's and pick me up, she said. We can talk about this on the way back home. Wrong answer, he said, causing her to recoil yet again. There's no way in hell I'm going over there. If you want to come home, you can walk or call an Uber. The only thing we have to talk about is how we're going to split everything up. What do you mean, split everything up? She asked. That's what usually happens in a divorce, which I don't want. A divorce, please, can't we get through this? I didn't want to be drugged and cucked either. Just get your bum home if you feel the need to talk. But I'm warning you, don't let Jake or any of those others bring you home, and if any of them step foot in my house, I'll blow their heads off, so help me God. You understand me, witch? Oh, okay. I'll call an Uber. Do that, and make sure you either have cash or your ATM card. Why? She asked. Because your credit card doesn't work anymore. Why doesn't my credit card work anymore? Because I cancelled it last night. Oh, she quietly said. By the way, do you happen to know where my phone is? Yeah, it's here on the coffee table, Mark said. Got an interesting collection of pictures, pies, and video, by the way. Now I know what you and W have been doing these last 3 months or so when you claim to be on business trips. They'll really help my divorce case. Oh, my God, she whispered. Mark, I'm really very sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. Shut up, witch, and save your worthless excuses for someone who gives a, he said. Now if you want to come and talk to me, do it now while you can and come alone. I'll be there. Mark ended the call, putting the phone down. She looked at Jake. Well? Jake asked. He's not coming, she said. I need to go there and talk to him. All right, we'll take you then, he said. She shook her head. No, he's armed, and he said if any of you show up, he'd kill you. I think he really means it. You didn't hear him. I've never heard him so angry in my life. Jake thought for a moment, then went into his study. He came back out with a syringe in his hand. Here's what we do. Put this in your purse. You call an Uber, and we'll follow you to your place. The first chance you get, you pull the cap off and inject it into his arm, all of it. Then you call me. We'll be close by. We'll come and pick him up and put him in the trunk of my car. What is that? She asked. It's just a special concoction I had made up for him, Jake said. Some narcotics, heroin, and something to put him out. It acts pretty fast. Don't worry, it won't hurt him. Just stick him with it. And when he's out, you call me. Got it? He handed her the syringe and watched as she carefully put it into her purse. Okay, she said. Just promise me you won't hurt him. We'll do our best, right boys, he added, looking at the 3 men, who laughed. He turned back to Allison. Go ahead, call for your ride. She arranged for an Uber driver to pick her up in a half hour and went back upstairs to finish getting ready. When the driver arrived, she got in the car and left. Jake and his 3 friends got into his car and followed Allison, parking about a block away. None of them took note of the white van parked on the street across from Jake's house. A few minutes after he spoke to Allison, Mark's phone rang again. He saw it was RK, so he answered. "What's up?" he asked. "Just wanted to let you know my boys picked up a conversation between your wife and her accomplices," AR said. "What?" Mark asked. "How, you ask?" "The wonders of modern technology, my friend," he said. "You'd be amazed at what we can do these days with a parabolic microphone. Anyway, your wife is getting an Uber, and her buddies are going to follow behind. They plan on dosing you with something, then kidnapping you. Whatever it is, it's in her purse. Apparently, she's going to hit you with it as soon as she gets a chance. My boys will follow Jake and his crew when they leave." "Damn," Mark said. "Yeah," R said. "Anyway, just be careful. I'll text you when they leave. Turn on the surveillance gear when she gets there, and I'll monitor it. I'm just down the street. I'll call the cops when the time comes. Just be ready, okay?" "Thanks," he said. He waited and got the text about a half hour later. On the move. Showtime, Mark said to himself. He knew he had about 20 minutes or so before they arrived. So he stashed the shotgun where he knew Allison wouldn't spot it right away and turned the surveillance gear on. He went into the kitchen and grabbed a plastic Ziploc bag for the syringe and a tissue. He saw the Uber pull up in front of his house and watched as Allison paid the driver and got out of the car. She seemed exceptionally nervous and kept her hand on her purse, which was slung over her left shoulder. He hit the switch to turn on the fireplace and watched as the pictures and her dress started to catch on fire. She walked to the door and slowly opened it. She gasped as she walked in and smelled the cigarette smoke. Mark really didn't care. Her eyes grew wide when she saw the destroyed portrait over the fireplace and got even wider when she looked at her dress and photos, now turning to ash. "My wedding dress," she exclaimed. "Our pictures, Mark, why are you doing this?" Tears were falling down her face, but he was unmoved. "I wanted you to see for yourself what your actions have done to us," he said. She looked at the beer bottles and cigarette butts in her beloved candy dish. "I thought you had a low tolerance for alcohol, and I never knew you smoked." "I used to smoke but quit. As for the other, the truth is, I get downright mean when I get drunk. The last time I got really drunk, I nearly killed a man with my bare hands. A much bigger man than me, by the way. I made a choice to never get drunk again, just like you made a choice to become Jake's witch." "Oh my God, Mark, what have I done?" she said. "You tell me. What the hell happened to you? You used to be the sweetest, kindest, most level-headed person I ever knew. Did you overdose on stupid pills? Did Jake hit you with a Martian 3.0 for Ray? Since when have you snorted cocaine, and who are all these men you've been screwing?" "Clients, mostly," she said quietly. "Jake made me." "Oh, terrific. You know your actions could put Marcus Financial out of business. Tell me, how long have you wanted to drug me and assault me in the rear? Was that your idea, or is that something Jake put you up to?" She looked at him, shocked. "I never," she began before Mark cut her off. "Shut the hell up," he said, pulling out his phone. He played the video and let her hear herself and her accomplices talk as they stood over him. Her face turned white as she heard her own words. "How did you get that?" she asked. "It doesn't matter," he said. "What's important is that David and the members of the board now have this video. The police will have it also. Not only are we getting divorced, but if I have my way, you'll be in prison for a very long time." "I just want to know why," she said. "You don't understand," she said. "It's a long story. Maybe you can tell me one day when I'm not so inclined to wring your scrawny neck," Mark said. He watched her as she started to open her purse, but before she could do anything, he ripped it off her shoulder and dumped the contents on the coffee table. He saw the syringe filled with a dark liquid and picked it up with the tissue he had set aside for that purpose. "Is this what you had planned for me?" he asked. "Do you even know what this is?" "Not exactly," she asked sarcastically. "You mean to tell me you were going to inject this into me without any clue what it really is or what it could do? You're one sick witch, you know that? Did Jake tell you to do this?" She nodded her head. "Yes," she said quietly. "I suppose if Jake told you to shove a red-hot poker up your bum, you'd do that too, wouldn't you? Let me guess, you're supposed to inject this into me, then call him when I'm down so he can come kidnap me. Am I right?" Ashamed, she nodded her head. "Pretty much. All right, here's what we're going to do. You're going to call Jake, put it on speaker so I can hear both sides. You're going to tell Jake you did what he asked. I'll take it from there. Don't you dare tell him I'm waiting for him, got it?" "You want me to set him up?" she asked. "Yes, any questions?" he asked. She shook her head. "No," she said. "I understand." "Good, now do it. And no tricks." Mark watched as she called and put the phone on speaker. "Jake, it's me, Ally," she said. "It's done?" he asked. "He's out," she said. "Good girl, we'll be right there," he said. She ended the call and looked at Mark. "He's going to kill me when he sees you're not really down and out." "Tough," he said. "Remember, no signals, nothing to let him know the truth, otherwise, I may kill you myself." He sat in a recliner and waited for Jake to come inside. When he saw Jake and his three buddies through the window, he closed his eyes but left them open just enough so he could see. Jake opened the door and walked inside. He looked around at the mess before starting to come toward Mark. "You did good," he told Allison. "Now we're going to put him in the trunk." Jake reached down to lift Mark, but before he could lay a hand on him, Mark opened his eyes. Before Jake could react, Mark brought up one hand and smashed Jake in the throat. Jake reeled back, and Mark stood up. Jake shook his head for a second, but Mark was already on the move and kicked him as hard as he could in the crotch. The other three stepped inside to help Jake but were detained by RK's men, who had followed them onto Mark's property. Jake was on his knees, moaning in pain. Mark slipped behind him and pulled out his hunting knife. As he knelt down, he grabbed Jake's hair and pulled his head up while positioning the knife at his throat. "Make your peace with God, Jake," Mark growled, "because I'm going to cut your head off." Jake pissed his pants in fear as Allison recoiled in horror. "Who is this monster?" she asked herself. Jake began pressing the knife against Jake's throat when he heard RK's voice from the door. "Sergeant R," shouted RK, getting everyone's attention. "Don't do it. Drop the knife. Police are on their way." "This dog deserves to die," Mark exclaimed. "But not at your hand," RK said. "Listen to me, Mark. If you kill him, he'll feel nothing ever again. He'll turn to dust in his grave. But you'll end up in prison. You deserve your revenge, but what kind of revenge is that? This isn't Iraq, buddy. Let the authorities do their job, please. I'm asking you as a friend. Put the knife down and let the police take him in. He'll pay for what he's done. They all will." Mark looked at his friend for a minute before responding. He could feel Jake trembling in fear for his life. He slowly pulled the knife away from Jake's throat and stood up. Behind him, looking down, he saw Jake crying. RK turned him over and had him lay on the floor face down as he zip-tied Jake's hands behind his back. RK then turned to Allison and told her to lay on the floor as well, face down, hands behind her back. She complied and looked in the fireplace as RK secured her hands. Hot tears fell down her face as she watched a picture of her and Mark catch fire and turn to ash. Mark sat on the couch and watched RK make sure both Allison and Jake were secure. The other three were in the front yard, similarly secured by RK's men. They heard the sirens of the police cruisers as they stopped in front of Mark's house. Hand me your phone, RK said. I'll go talk to the police before they come inside. Mark nodded his head and gave RK his phone as RK left. Jake lifted his head and turned to face Mark. His smirk was finally gone. Apparently, all it took was the thought that he was about to die. You know, my father always did love you more than he did me, Jake said. Not true, Jake, Mark told him. He always hoped you would mature enough to step into his shoes one day. Would you really have cut my head off? Jake asked. I guess we'll never know now, will we? Mark asked in response. But I guarantee you, where you're going, you'll be surrounded by people who won't hesitate the way I did. And I promise, if you ever come after me like this again, I won't hesitate either. Jake laid his head back on the floor and said nothing. 3 large police officers came into the house and surveyed the situation. Picking Jake and Allison up, they read them their Miranda rights and marched them out to the cruisers. One officer looked at the syringe laying on the coffee table in its plastic bag and picked it up. Is this what they plan to use on you? He asked Mark. Yes, it is, he said. The officer made notes as he took Mark's full statement. After about a half hour, he turned to Mark. You were lucky, you know that, don't you? He asked. No, my fellow Marine had my back, the officer smiled and nodded his head. Semper Fi, the officer said, shaking Mark's hand. Ora, Mark said in response. After they left, RK came into the front room and sat on the couch. You got another one of those? He asked, pointing at the beer bottles. I think I have 1 or 2 left. Kind of early for this, don't you think? After this, no, RK said as Mark handed him a cold bottle. How are you holding up? Okay, I feel like I did back in Iraq, though. I guess I need to decompress a bit. Yeah, about that. I talked to Gunny this morning. He said he'd take care of everything if you wanted to go hang out in Vegas for a few days. Told me to give you his number. I may just do that. I have a few things to take care of here first, though. RK pulled a couple of cards out of his pocket and handed them to Mark. There's Gunny's number if you want to call. The other card is for a divorce lawyer. I do work for Michelle Hawkins, she's a real shark, hates cheaters with a passion. I took the liberty of calling her this morning. She said she's expecting you at her office at 8 a.m. sharp Monday morning. Thanks, Mark said, nodding his head. For everything. Hey, Semper Fi, bro, do or die, RK said. Mark chuckled at that. Ora, he said in response. After they finished their beer, RK stood up and looked around. Looks like you've got a bit of cleaning to do here, so I'll be on my way. See you, my friend. I'll be by later to get all the surveillance gear. RK left, and Mark turned to the job of cleaning the house. That afternoon, he got a call from David Matt. Mark, this is David Matt, the older man said when Mark answered the phone. Yes, Mr. Matt, what can I do for you? Mark asked. You can start by calling me David. I got your email and looked at the video. So did the board members. We're all in agreement with what you said in your letter, which I must say was quite impressive. Thank you, David, you're welcome, he answered. We also agreed that both Allison and Jake's employment should be terminated immediately, especially given that they're both in custody right now. I'm heading to the county jail to take care of that personally. There's a couple of other things. What's that? Mark asked. We think it would be good if you took a few days to go somewhere, let off a bit of steam. You have someplace you'd like to go for a bit? A friend of mine said he'd look after me in Vegas for a few days. I have an appointment with a divorce lawyer Monday, then I'll be looking to head out. Vegas, who? Well, I can't think of a better place to get your mind off all this than Vegas. Have a good trip, Mark, and we'll see you a week from Monday. Thanks, David, I will. There's just a couple of other things. We unanimously agreed that with Jake's departure, you would be the best person for his job, Mark asked. Absolutely. We're very impressed with the way you dealt with this, and the board has had its eye on you for a while. I don't mind telling you, they're very happy with your work. Of course, there will be a nice increase and a few other benefits along with that promotion. But I think you deserve it. Thanks, David. Don't thank me just yet. The first thing we need for you to do is oversee the external audit we're going to have done. We're bringing in auditors from an external outfit to go over everything Jake has touched since he's been here. They'll report directly to you, and you'll report those findings, good, bad, or indifferent, to me. I think that's a good idea. I've learned since I sent that email that Jake has had Allison engage in sex with some of our clients. David uttered, "Good God." Well, I'll leave that in your capable hands. In the meantime, you have a good trip, and we'll see you a week from Monday. With it, see you then, David, Mark said. Thank you. Following David's call, Mark cleaned the house to the end and then mowed the yard as he usually did on Saturdays. He then called Gunny Johnson and they caught up on everything. So, would you like to spend a few days and enjoy yourself a little? Gunny inquired. Indeed, it's fine, no problem. Come on over, and I'll show you around and get you situated in a comfortable room. And that's you on your own. They laughed at that, saying, and please remember, this is Las Vegas, not Bangkok. I'll remember, Gunny, Mark replied. See you Monday evening. RK stopped by and gathered his gear, saying, see you, Mark. Just wanted to give you a little update. Gunny said. When police searched Jake's home, they discovered an abundance of drugs, sex toys, DVDs, and other items. It looks like Jake was quite the creep. My friend who works for the force told me he wouldn't be shocked if they found more illicit materials among all the stuff they seized. Damn, RK stayed for dinner, and shortly afterward, mentally and physically spent, Mark fell asleep. The following day, he started packing up everything Allison had, hauling it all into the garage and deciding not to take it all to Goodwill until he was positive she was going to jail. He arrived at Michelle Hawkins's office at precisely 8 o'clock the following morning, where she inspected his evidence and paperwork, took notes while he spoke, explained to him California's divorce laws, explained that everything is usually divided equally, and that since they had no children and the house was his before they got married, the court would probably let him keep the house, given that they had already divided their bank accounts. She said the court would probably give Allison the half. That was still in their account, explained that her adultery could not be brought up in the divorce. Nonetheless, the judge would very likely consider Allison's criminal accusations in any order, and concluded that it was highly unlikely he would have to pay her. I'll draw up the papers and have them served. I'll do everything I can to make this as painless as possible, Michelle stated. I'll give them to the judge if she signs them exactly as they are. After that, you have to wait 6 months. Mark agreed, giving her a retainer for her work, and then, on his way home, he stopped by the county jail to inform Allison that he was going to file for divorce. Sitting at the table, he watched as they brought her out, looking gaunt in the orange jumpsuit that did nothing to accentuate her figure, and they picked up the handset so they could talk, with the thick plexiglass shield standing between them. Hello, Allison. Hi, Mark. I just wanted to let you know that I filed for divorce after seeing an attorney today. She said, I knew you would. When's your arraignment hearing? It's tomorrow morning. We are to be detained without bond, per the request of the prosecutor. That seems like it would work out the best. Tell me something, and I want the God's honest truth. What is that? May I ask? She inquired. How on earth did that happen to you? She cast an embarrassed glance down. At first, everything was going pretty well with the job. In every way, Jake appeared to be an ordinary executive. The real beginning of things came after Alan's death. Jake blamed you for his lack of promotion, which infuriated him. He mentioned that it was likely his father had arranged for you to be hired. That's crazy. Alan always said he hoped Jake would become the CEO one day. I know, she replied. It all started that weekend when we traveled to New York. We were having a good time drinking and dancing at a club with some of our clients, nothing too crazy. Yes, I did engage in some light flirting, but I didn't feel inappropriate. I felt great the next thing I knew, and before I knew it, I was in bed with two of the other guys. After a brief pause, she said, the next morning, I realized what had happened and I felt really guilty about it. Jake joined in later. So he blackmailed you, Mark remarked. And I bet he drugged you as well. He did, she acknowledged. He admitted it to me later. Jake then showed me some photos and video that he had taken and threatened to make sure you got them. It's not shocking that they discovered a ton of drugs in his apartment. Did he introduce you to Coca-Cola? Yes, and weed and some other stuff, she nodded. So how many of our clients did you end up doing? She asked. I don't know, several, she shrugged her shoulders. From the video I shot, it seemed to me that you were pretty excited about the whole idea, drugging me, making me into a coke addict for Jake's amusement. That's pretty much what I did whenever we went anywhere. Mark shook his head. Tell me, did the Henderson project really come up at dinner on Wednesday? No, she replied, shaking her head. We were organizing Friday's celebration. So you organized everything ahead of time? Yes, Allison said quietly, nodding her head. I apologize, Mark. Yeah, that's about the first thing you said that I agree with, Allison said. Do you think you'll ever be able to let me go? Before responding, he laughed and said, not no, but hell no. God only knows how many other times you have cheated on me with that a-hole. After that, you and him planned to drug and beat me. You have lost your mind. And don't even try to make friends with me. Mark, I hope it was all worth it for you. I understand, she said. Goodbye, Allison. I'm going home, he said. Packing up and leaving for Vegas as he watched her hang up the phone, tears streaming down her cheeks. Mark, this is Candy, Gunny Johnson said, she'll be your guide while you're here. Gunny, this really isn't necessary, Mark said. Nonsense, son. After they had dinner, he got together with Gunny Johnson and the two reminisced. After that, Gunny showed him around and gave him some tips for the gambling tables. Finally, he escorted him to his room. After everything your wife has put you through, this is precisely what you need. They all laughed at that. Well, I got to go. Relax, have a good time, and remember, what happens here stays here. He said, you kids have fun, and walked off. Mark turned to face Candy. Please tell me if you're in. He started. Escort, Candy inquired, a prostitute. Not anymore, because of Gunny. I'm clean, attending school, and working a real job because of him, who helped me get out of a really horrible situation. All he did was tell me a little about you and ask if I would be interested in hanging out with you. I'll leave and never bother you again if that's what you want. No, Mark replied. You're right. You are a very beautiful woman, and right now I could use some company. Would you like to grab a drink or do something else? That seems pleasant, she grinned. I have classes today, but I can meet you back here tonight if you want, she said, and they kissed before she left. Sounds like a plan, he replied. They went to the club and had a few drinks, then talked and danced for a few hours before returning to his room, where she spent the night helping him forget his problems. The following morning, he woke up to find her beside him. From there, he strolled over to the casino to try his luck at a few games. He took Gunny's advice and left that afternoon with about $300 extra in his pocket. He spent that money on dinner, drinks, and a show with Candy that night, and she once again completely rocked his world. The rest of the week went pretty much as planned. By Friday, he was ready to head home and live the rest of his life. Candy hated to see him go, but understood. She gave him her phone number and email address in case he ever wanted to get in touch with her. He liked her, but he never imagined that their relationship would last. After all, he thought, who knows? He smiled as he drove home, thoughts of Candy running through his mind. Once home, he caught up on the news about Allison and her friends. The judge, having seen the evidence presented by the prosecutor, ordered them all to be held without bond. He also got confirmation from Michelle that she had served Allison with divorce papers, which she said she signed right away and had filed with the court. In 6 months, he would be permanently free of her. When he returned to work the next Monday, everything had been moved into Jake's old office, and everyone wished him well in his new role. He settled into his new office and met the external auditors, got them situated, and met his new assistant, Marcia Bodin, who he had known since she first started working for the company a few years earlier, liked her, knew she was married, had received great reviews from her previous supervisors, and was very careful not to bring up his situation. Many irregularities in Jake's paperwork were discovered during the audit. First, he had falsified his expense account on multiple trips that he and Allison had taken. Second, the auditors discovered that Jake had mismanaged some of their clients' accounts. The SEC was notified right away, and federal charges were brought against Jake. Over the course of the next few months, Mark and David had to spend a great deal of time clearing up the mess that Jake had left behind. Fortunately, their prompt response saved them from losing any clients, but it did result in several awkward meetings with understandably upset other executives. Mark, meanwhile, continued to correspond with Candy primarily by email. Eventually, she told him that she had met someone at school with whom she was seriously in love. He was not shocked and wished Candy well. Mark found himself testifying against his wife and her co-conspirators while Allison and Jake's trials dragged on as charges were added and motions were back and forth. Her defense team tried to talk him out of testifying against his own wife, but he persisted, telling her lawyer, "I may not be required to, but I want to. Besides, in a few weeks, she won't be my wife anymore." When the day finally arrived for the jury to deliver their verdict, Mark and David sat in the courtroom and watched as Allison, Jake, and the other 3 men were brought in. None of them could look Mark in the face. The jury was shocked by his testimony, and even more so when they watched the video that Mark had taken that Friday night. The trial had turned into a media circus by the time it was called to order, and when the judge asked if the jury had reached a verdict, the foreman got up and declared that they had. Then, everyone waited in suspense as the judge listed all of the charges against Jake, including conspiracy to kidnap and assault, and charges related to drugs discovered in his townhouse and explicit pictures and videos he had of other women. They were all found guilty of every single charge brought against them. The judge set a date for sentencing, and the 5 now convicted conspirators were led out of the courtroom, Mark and David walking out, squeezing past the phalanx of reporters shoving cameras in their faces. After about 10 days, they were sentenced, and the judge made it clear he was deeply disgusted with all 5 of them, essentially flinging the book at them. 3 of Jake's friends received the lightest sentences, but they were still facing 20 years in prison. Allison received a 25 years to a life sentence. Jake ended up with 50 years to life for his crimes, plus federal charges brought by the SEC, which would be heard in federal court. Allison sobbed as she was led out of the courtroom, while Jake just looked down in shame as he was taken away. A month after the sentencing, Mark was sitting in his office going over some paperwork when Marcia buzzed him on the intercom. It seems that he riled up the wrong people who didn't care for his smug attitude. However, Jake's time in prison ended about 6 months later when he was found decapitated in the shower. "Mr. There's a Dr. Kristen Marr, Hurley. 'Cause here to see you." Mark noticed the last name. He ordered her to come in. The door opened, and Mark saw a pretty blonde walk into his office. Her skirt hung just below her knees, and her hair hung down below her shoulders. She grinned and held out her hand to him. "It's great to finally meet you, Mr. Hurley," she replied. "Please call me Mark," he said, shaking her hand and urging her to take a seat. "Do you want to have a drink? Tea or coffee?" "Black coffee would be excellent." "And do give me a call, Kristen." "Marcus," Mark said, looking at her, "are you any relation to Alan?" as his assistant left the office. Mark then asked Marcia to get them each a cup of coffee and sat down. "Maybe his daughter?" She shook her head, grinning. "No, I'm his niece." "I understand. It surprises me that we haven't met earlier. I believed I had gotten to know most of Alan's relatives. I have had a lot going on. I was unable to attend Uncle Alan's funeral because I was in France at the time of his passing." "Well, how may I assist you now?" he inquired. "All I wanted was to meet the man who demolished my cousin, who was a real $1 hole. I assume that you two still have a lot of love for one another." "No, none," she muttered, shaking her head. "I'm just relieved that he's been made to pay for his crimes at last. I sincerely apologize for what he did to you." I'm sorry, based on what I know about you, none of it was justified. My uncle has told me a lot about you. I see that you work as a doctor. Do you practice medicine? No, I'm a business and economics PhD holder. I am a professor at UCLA. I have a lot of the same interests as my uncle, but I lean more academic. She laughed and said, and no, I'm not interested in moving upstairs into the corner office. Mark didn't want the conversation to end and, to be honest, he was interested in this woman, so they spoke for a while longer before she said she had to return to work. Listen, Kristen, I'd love to continue this discussion with you, say over dinner. Assuming you don't mind being recognized in public as someone with a menial MBA. There's nothing lowly about being an MBA, and I'd love to be seen with you in public, she said with a sparkling smile. It would be a great dinner. What about tonight at 7 o'clock at Red Lobster? Red Lobster it is, Mark said, taking the card from her. I'll pick you up at 6:30 if that works. She gave him a card with her address and phone number on it. Mark, I'll see you then. It's been a pleasure meeting you, she remarked as she turned to leave. He told her about his experience with Jake and what happened with Allison, and Kristen was shocked but not surprised. That evening, Mark learned from Kristen that Jake attempted to assault her after she had just turned 18. She was ashamed and afraid she might be held responsible, so she never said anything to anyone but avoided Alan and his family as much as she could. She also avoided relationships with men as a result of Jake's actions and spent months in therapy while going through college. You're worthy of much better. After dating for a few months and falling in love, Mark proposed to Kristen, to which she almost threw him to the ground and showered him with kisses. I take it that's a yes. When she finally allowed him to breathe, Mark asked. No, Maureen, that's a big yes. Now, take me to bed and properly ravish me, she commanded. Yes, Mark replied as he led his future wife upstairs. Yes, he thought to himself, everything was looking good. Please feel free to express your opinions in the space provided for comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.